It was past midnight in Memphis, rain hammering Bill Street. Elvis's limousine slowed. Through the windshield, he saw hearth and coat, cardboard sign sagging in the downpour. Witnesses recall, he told the driver, "Stop, right here." Stories like this show the kind of man Elvis was beyond the music. If you love true moments of kindness from legends, stay with me for this one. Wipers slammed back and forth. Rain hammered the hood. Then, without warning, the limousine jolted to a stop. It was past midnight in Memphis. Mid-70s, Beale Street still glowing in blues neon. The kind of rain that soaked you through in seconds sheeted across the pavement, turning every light into a smear of gold and red. The muffled bass of a bar band thumped from somewhere down the block. Inside the limo, Elvis leaned forward from the back seat, eyes fixed on something through the fogged glass. His bodyguard followed the stare and saw her. She was hunched on the curb beside a bus stop pole. A paper cup rattled faintly in the wind, its coins shifting with each gust. Her coat looked like it had been pulled from a thrift bin years ago. 2 sizes too big, the sleeves heavy and dripping. Elvis said nothing at first, just pointed. The driver glanced in the rear view. "Mr. Presley, we pull over," Elvis said. The driver hesitated, eyes darting to the crowd spilling out of a nearby club. All it would take was one person recognizing him, and the night would explode into chaos. But Elvis didn't look away from the woman. "Right here," he said. Firmer this time. The tires hissed against wet asphalt as the limo eased to the curb. The moment the door cracked open, the night hit them cool, metallic air laced with the smell of wet asphalt and frying catfish from the diner down the street. Rain splashed off the brim of Elvis's hair as he stepped out, his white jacket catching the glow from a neon beer sign. The woman didn't look up. She was still staring. At the dark street, her knees drawn in. A bus roared past, spray exploding up from its wheels, briefly blinding the view. When it cleared, Elvis was already crossing the sidewalk toward her. She lifted her head just as he reached her. Her eyes flicked over his face, confusion giving way to recognition. Witnesses later said you could see the moment it clicked her. Breath hitched, her shoulders straightened slightly, as though remembering how to stand tall. But Elvis didn't speak right away. He crouched, getting on her level. Rain beaded on his hair, ran down his jaw. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down, the cardboard sign between them sagging from the rain. Elvis glanced at the sign, then back at her. "Come on," he said, and held out his hand. She hesitated just for a heartbeat before placing her soaked, trembling fingers in his dot. In the next few minutes, that simple decision would change the rest of her life. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it came harder, drumming against the sidewalk like 1,000 small hammers. Elvis was already kneeling in it. Up close, she looked older than she had from the limo, maybe 50, maybe older, hard to tell through the soaked strands of hair plastered across her cheeks. Her coat hung from her shoulders like it belonged to someone twice her size. The sleeves, heavy with water, brushed against the puddles beside her. At her knee leaned a warped piece of cardboard, the black marker letters running together. "Just hungry." Elvis's voice was steady, almost gentle. "Ma'am," she flinched, looked at him, then past him, as if certain this had to be some trick. Her eyes darted to the limo, to the man holding the umbrella just behind them, then back to Elvis's face. Recognition, sparked hesitation, held. Through the window of a diner across the street, a couple of patrons had turned to watch. One man tapped his friend, nodding toward the white jacket in the rain. Elvis didn't seem to notice. He shifted closer, lowering himself to a squat so their eyes were level. The rain flattened the front of his hair, trickled over his collar. "What's your name?" he asked. It took her a second to answer, her voice nearly drowned out by the hiss of tires passing through puddles. "Martha," he smiled. "Nice to meet you, Martha." A taxi barreled past, close enough to throw a wave over both of them. Cold water splashed across Elvis's shoulder, streamed down Martha's coat. She shivered, but Elvis didn't move away. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and offered it to her. She looked at it, then at him, as if unsure if she was allowed to take something so clean. Finally, she accepted it, pressing it to her face for a moment. "I'm okay," she murmured, though she clearly WASN single quotes to dot. Elvis shook his head. "Not tonight, you're not." Behind them, the bodyguard adjusted his stance, scanning the small crowd that was starting to form on the corner. Voices rose. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another pulled out a camera. Elvis caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He knew time was short before the quiet of this moment was gone. He extended his hand toward her again, palm up. The street light caught the droplets on his fingers. Martha hesitated, glancing once more at the limo, then back at his face. "It's warm in there," he said softly, "and dry." She gave a small nod. Her hand, cold and shaking, slid into his. As Elvis helped her to her feet, a cheer went up from across the street. Someone had shouted his name. He didn't look over. He simply guided her toward the waiting limousine, rain trailing behind them like a curtain. In moments, she would be stepping into a world she had only ever seen from far away. The limousine door opened with a low thud, and a rush of warm air spilled into the cold night. Rain pattered hard on the roof, the sound muffled as Elvis guided Martha inside. His hand stayed firm on her elbow, steady, not hurried. She ducked through the doorway, blinking against the sudden change in light. Inside, the world was different. The air was warm and faintly scented with leather and cologne. Soft amber lights lined the ceiling. The plush seats gleamed, untouched except for a folded blanket in the corner. She sat gingerly, as if afraid she might leave a wet mark that couldn't be cleaned. Her eyes flicked to the untouched platter of sandwiches on the side table. Turkey, ham, neat triangles with the crusts gone. Elvis noticed. "Go ahead," he said, nodding toward them. Martha shook her head. "There for you, there." "For anyone who's hungry," he replied. She reached out slowly, took one triangle. Her hands shook as she bit into it. She chewed like someone trying to remember how to eat slowly. Elvis leaned back, watching her without judgment. Outside voices were getting louder. A small group had gathered by the curb, still too far for the flash of cameras, but close enough for whispers to carry. The bodyguard leaned in toward Elvis. "We should go, E." Instead of nodding, Elvis turned to Martha. "Where are you?" "Staying tonight." Her chewing slowed. She looked at her lap. "Nowhere. Family here." He asked. She shook her head. He waited. She didn't elaborate. For a moment, Elvis glanced toward the tinted window. Outside, someone's pointing finger traced their outline in the glass. He knew the crowd was seconds from swelling. He turned back to her. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll fix that." The limo pulled from the curb. Rain streaked sideways across the windows as the neon blur of Beale Street slid by. Elvis leaned forward, murmured something to the driver, too quiet for Martha to catch. Her eyes darted to him. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere warm," he said. The driver changed course. Not toward Graceland. Not toward any hotel she recognized. Martha looked at the sandwiches again, then at Elvis, as though searching for a catch. There was none in his expression, just focus, and the faintest trace of a smile in a few minutes. The limo would stop again, this time at a place where strangers didn't expect to see the king of rock and roll in the corner booth. The limo slowed again, this time under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. They were nowhere near Graceland. Instead, the car rolled up beside a squat brick building with fogged-up windows and a hand-painted sign, "Mel's 24-hour Diner." The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted out when the door opened. Elvis stepped out first, holding the door for Martha. She hesitated on the curb, eyes scanning the quiet street. This was the kind of place locals came to avoid attention. Inside, the bell over the door jingled. The hum of the diner was low, just the clink of forks on plates, the hiss of something sizzling on the grill. The waitress froze mid-step, coffee pot in hand. Her eyes widened, recognition sparking. Elvis gave a small nod and a smile that seemed to tell her, "Not tonight." She blinked, then recovered, motioning them to a booth tucked into the far corner, away from the windows. Martha slid into the vinyl seat, the warmth from the heater finally reaching deep into her bones. Steam rose from mugs on nearby tables. The smell of buttered toast was almost dizzying. Elvis leaned toward the waitress. "Something warm for my friend here." When the mug of coffee arrived, Martha cupped it with both hands, as if afraid the heat might vanish. She took a sip, closing her eyes for a second longer than necessary. Between sips, she began to talk, not all at once, but in fragments. How she'd lost her husband to illness 2 winters ago. How she'd come to Memphis looking for factory work. How the work had dried up, and so had her savings. Elvis didn't interrupt. He didn't check the clock. He simply listened, elbows on the table, as if there was nowhere else in the world he needed to be. The door opened. A gust of cold air swept in, along with 2 men in damp jackets. One of them glanced toward the corner booth, froze, and whispered. To the other, the waitress caught it instantly. She gave them a look sharp enough to send them to a booth on the other side. Elvis reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around something. He placed it on the table, not sliding it, not tossing it, just setting it down with quiet intention. The waitress, coming by to refill Martha's cup, caught sight of it. She gasped, her hand tightening on the coffee pot. Martha looked from the object to Elvis, confused. "What's that?" she asked softly. Elvis smiled, but didn't answer. "Something for later," he said. Whatever it was, it would not be opened here. And when Martha finally saw what was inside, it would change far more than her night. It wasn't flashy, no gold trim, no fancy paper, just a plain white envelope, sealed with a folded note taped to the front. Martha stared at it as if it might not be real. The tape was slightly crooked, the handwriting neat but unpretentious. Elvis nudged it toward her with 2 fingers. "Open it later," he said, voice soft but certain. She shook her head. "I can't." "Take this, you can," he replied. "Steady, and you will." She tried pushing it back across the table, but his hand came down lightly on top of hers. The contact was brief, but grounding his palm warm against her cold. "Knuckles," witnesses recall, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Tonight, you sleep inside, promise me." Her eyes glistened, though she didn't speak. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The diner's front window reflected the streetlights shining off puddles, the water now calm, almost mirror-like. The waitress returned with a slice of pie, setting it in front of Martha. She looked from the desert to Elvis. "She finished that," he told the waitress. "Make sure of it." The waitress nodded, still glancing at the envelope, as if she knew exactly what it might mean. From the far side of the diner, the two men in damp jackets were still watching. One of them reached into his pocket, pulling out a small camera. Elvis noticed, but didn't react. His focus stayed on Martha. He rose from the booth, adjusting his jacket. The envelope sat on the table, between them, untouched. "Don't let that out of your sight," he said. The smell of cinnamon from the pie drifted up as she nodded. Elvis stepped around the table, shaking the waitress's hand on the way out. The bell over the door jingled softly as he left, the sound of his footsteps fading into the stillness of the street. Martha stayed in the booth for several minutes after he was gone, sipping coffee, trying to process what had just happened. Her hand finally reached for the envelope, feeling the slight weight inside, hearing a faint shift of paper within, but she didn't open it, not yet. She slipped it into her coat pocket, fingers brushing against the note taped to the front. The ink was slightly smudged from the damp air. She decided she'd read it later, somewhere quiet, away from curious eyes. What she didn't know was that by the next morning, that envelope would rewrite the next chapter of her life entirely. It was the next morning when Martha finally tore the envelope open. She was sitting at a corner table in a small coffee shop just off Main Street, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Outside the sun was pale, breaking through after the night's heavy rain. She'd slept indoors for the first time in weeks at a low-cost boarding house the waitress had recommended, and for the first time in a long while. She wasn't shivering. She slid a finger under the flap. The paper inside was thick, neatly folded. Something else came with its soft, crisp bills, more than she'd ever held at one time. Her breath caught. She counted once, then stopped, overwhelmed. It was more than enough to cover rent for a year, maybe more if she was careful. On top of the bills was the folded note. She opened it slowly, smoothing it against the table. "Everyone needs a little light in the dark. You deserve yours, Elvis." Martha sat back in her chair, staring at the handwriting. She traced each word with her finger, as if memorizing the way the pen had pressed into the paper. For a moment, she thought about the night before his steady voice, the way he never once made her feel like a spectacle, how he'd crouch down in the rain so they could speak eye to eye. The coffee shop smelled faintly of fresh bread. The murmur of quiet conversations blended with the occasional hiss of steam from the espresso machine. It felt safe, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She tucked the money and note back into the envelope, holding it close against her chest. No one else in the shop knew what she'd just received, and she wanted to keep it that way. Word began to spread, though not from her. The waitress from MELTS told a friend, who told another. Within days, the story of Elvis stopping his limousine for a homeless woman in the rain was quietly circulating around Memphis. Some say Elvis sent more help afterward anonymously, through people who knew how to get it to her without drawing attention. Those who knew him well wouldn't be surprised. Martha kept the apartment she rented with that money for nearly 3 years. It was a small place, 2 streets away from the spot where they'd first met, a second-hand armchair by the window, a stove that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. But it was hers. She kept the envelope and the note in a kitchen drawer, wrapped in a piece of cloth to keep them safe. Years later, when Martha passed away, Her niece found them. The paper was still crisp, the ink slightly faded. She framed the note and kept it in her living room. When visitors asked, she'd tell the story how her aunt had once been cold and wet on a Memphis sidewalk, and how the king of rock and roll had stopped everything to make sure she found her way back inside. For the family, the note was more than a memory. It was proof that kindness could stop the rain, if only for one person, one night. And for those who still tell the story, it's a reminder that the smallest decision, slowing a car, offering a hand, can leave a legacy that outlives the moment. One act of kindness can change more than a night. It can change a life. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop the rain. What's one moment of unexpected kindness you'll never forget?